They were hanging me for burning a church no one had stepped inside for 30 years, and the bell in its tower was already ringing again. That is the truth. You can call the rest blasphemy if it helps your stomach. You can call it a lie if it makes the rope sit easier in your hands. But before you drop me through this trap, listen hard. Listen past the horses. Listen past the wind. Listen to the nails in this scaffold, to the buckles on your belts, to the little iron tongues inside your spurs. You hear that faint chiming? That is not the breeze. That's it listening. My name is Ezra Vane. I have been sheriff of Dunmire for 7 years. I have buried men shot in card games, boys kicked dead by horses, women taken by fever, and one fool who froze drunk in a warm spring because he forgot which way was up. I know the difference between sin, stupidity, and misfortune. What happened in St. Mercy was none of the three. They say I murdered Reverend Pike. I did. They say I burned the old church. I did that too. They say my deputy died because I turned mad. That part is the lie. If any of you still remember me as a decent man, then hear the whole thing before you let the town make an offering of me. It began 5 days ago, just after noon, when I heard the bell for the first time in a place where no bell should have fit. Not in the air. In the jail keys. I was sitting behind my desk writing a notice about 2 stolen mules when the ring of keys hanging from the wall began to tremble. Not shake. Not rattle. Tremble, as if a finger too small to see had brushed each piece of iron one by one. Then they chimed. Soft at first, then louder. The sound was deep for something that small. Old. Hollow. It did not belong to keys. It belonged to a bell high above a dead town, calling across open ground where no living church had held service since before I took office. I stood up so quickly I knocked the chair backward. Out on the street, every man and woman inside had stopped moving. Mrs. Bell from the general store stood with a flour sack in her arms and her eyes fixed on nothing. 2 ranch hands outside the saloon had gone still with their hats in their hands. A dog crouched under a wagon and tucked its nose beneath its paws. Even the horses looked ashamed. Then my deputy came through the office door, white as bone. Sheriff, Cal Reed said, they found Mike Boone. Where? By the dry wash south of the smithy. He did not have to say any more. I had already taken the keys from the hook, and the sound died in my hand like a heartbeat cut short. Micah Boone was alive when we reached him. That was the worst part. He lay face down in the dust with his arms folded under his chest as if he had tried to pray and failed halfway through it. His boots were dug into the dirt so deep it looked like he had been dragged forward by the mouth. Flies gathered in a black crown over the back of his neck. 3 men stood around him and did not touch him. Turn him over, I said. None of them moved. One was old Jasper Mays, who had seen a stagecoach massacre and once stitched his own thigh shut by lantern light. His lips were trembling. Sheriff, he whispered, he asked us not to. Micah made a sound then. Wet. Thin. Human enough to turn my stomach. Don't, he said into the dirt. Please don't turn me. Don't let it see me. I crouched beside him. Micah, I said, it's Ezra. You know me? His shoulders jerked once. Please, he whispered. Don't let it hear me no more. There was blood in the dust beneath his cheek. I put one hand on his shoulder and rolled him over before anyone could stop me. The women behind me screamed. I did not. I think fear sealed my throat. Micah's eyes were open. He was looking straight up into the white noon sky like a man waiting for something to fall. His mouth had been opened too wide, not torn. Opened, forced until the corners split. Inside was black wax, packed deep down his throat, hard and glossy, with little bright flecks in it that caught the sun like metal filings. His tongue was gone. He tried to speak anyway. What came out was a rattle and one clear word, so raw it barely sounded human. Told. Then he died. Nobody said anything for a long while. The wind crossed the wash and lifted the edge of Micah's shirt. I saw then that someone had drawn a line of soot from the center of his lower lip to the hollow at the base of his throat, as straight as a preacher's ruler. Cal crossed himself. Jasper Mays said, "He took testimony last night." I looked up at him. "What?" "Up at the church," Jasper said, "with Reverend Pike. Private testimony. That the sort of thing folks do now? It's always been done. That was not true, or not true enough." Reverend Harlan Pike had been hearing confessions of a sort for years, but not in any way the Catholics meant it, and not in any way I liked. He called it burden sharing. Said men carried too much in a hard country, and the soul soured if it stayed sealed. Most of Dunmire treated it like a custom older than the street itself. I had never bothered with it. A sheriff hears enough of other men's sins in daylight. I asked Jasper what Micah confessed. Jasper stepped back at once, as if even the question might stain him. "I don't know." Cal said quietly, "Nobody ever says." That was the first sign. Micah Boone, dead in the wash with wax where his tongue ought to have been. I should have ridden to St. Mercy right then. I should have put a bullet through that bell the moment I heard it, singing in iron. Instead, I did what men of the law always do when something impossible crawls up into their daylight. I looked for a human lie big enough to explain it. By sundown, I had spoken to half the town and gotten nothing but lowered eyes, old phrases, and one smell that seemed to hang over every answer. Fear dressed up as routine. The women put bowls of well water on their porches before dark. The men turned their hats inside out and left them by the door. Mothers tied little scraps of white cloth around their children's wrists. When I asked why, they all gave me some version of the same answer. That's how Dunmire does of an evening. Like the words had been handed down with the fences and the stove lids. After dark, the bell rang again. This time it came through the spoon in my coffee cup. I was sitting alone at the office stove, Cal gone home, the town sealed up tight around me. The spoon gave one little tap against the tin, then another. Then the whole cup sang low in my hand. Outside, every porch candle in Dunmire went out at once. I stood and stepped to the door. The street was black. Not empty. Never empty. You could feel people behind windows, listening through their own breath. Then somewhere west of town, where the old road bent towards St. Mercy, a church bell struck 3 times. I felt it in my teeth. The next morning, people were already forgetting Micah Boone. Not his death. The shape of it. Mrs. Bell told me she thought it had likely been poison. Jasper Mays said maybe Micah choked on pitch from the smithy. A ranch woman swore Micah had always had trouble speaking. By breakfast, the details had started slipping like grease through fingers. Only Cal looked as sick as I felt. "You notice it?" I asked him. He nodded. "They don't remember right." "No." He swallowed. "My ma used to do that too. I looked at him. When? After my father disappeared. I'd known Cal for 4 years and had never heard him say it that way. Folks said his father lit out, just saddled a horse one morning and vanished south. That was a frontier story, old as dust. Men left. Disappeared, I said. Cal kept his eyes on the street. She used to say that when the bell rang from St. Mercy, no one in the house was allowed to say sorry for anything. Not after sundown. Not even as a child. If I spilled soup and said I was sorry, she'd slap me hard enough to split my lip. He rubbed his thumb along the butt of his revolver. She said some things don't belong in the dark. That sat with me all morning. Near noon, I went to see Reverend Pike. He was in the new church on Chapel Street, trimming wicks in the sanctuary, long fingers steady as a surgeon's. He was a narrow man with a face like old paper and eyes that always looked damp, as if he had just heard bad news and meant to keep hearing it forever. He smiled when I came in. Then he saw my face and the smile left him. "This is about Boone," he said. "It is." He set the wick knife down. Terrible thing. You heard his testimony last night. His gaze moved once, quickly, toward the altar. I did. What did he tell you? I don't repeat a burden given in confidence. I stepped closer. A man is dead. And repeating it won't make him less so. His calm made me angrier than panic would have. I said, "What are you doing in this town, Reverend?" "Because folks are laying bowls of water on their steps like it keeps wolves off, and a dead man turned up with his mouth sealed like candlework after speaking to you alone." Pike's face changed then, not to guilt, to exhaustion. "You've been in Dunmire 7 years, Sheriff. Long enough to know some things are older than either of us." "That don't answer me." "No," he said. "It doesn't." He looked past me to the church doors, though no one stood there. Then he lowered his voice. "If the bell rings again, do not ride west after dark." Why? Because there are habits in this county that outlive the people who started them. I laughed once. There was no humor in it. Is that meant to be wisdom? It is meant to keep you alive. I left before I put my hands on him. That afternoon, I went digging where no preacher could stop me. Dunmire kept its oldest records in a shed behind the clerk's office where dust did half the accounting. I found maps, tax ledgers, cattle counts, a marriage book swollen by rain, and at the bottom of a rotten cedar chest, a bundle of papers tied in black ribbon. The top sheet read, "Names taken under testimony. No signature, no date." Beneath it was a list. Micah Boone, Lena Bell, Tom Sutter, Miriam Cole, Jonah Pike. Names from the last 6 years, some crossed out, some marked with a small circle. Beside a few, a single word had been written in another hand. Heard. I knew those names. Not because they were dead, because they were gone. People who had drifted, run off, moved away, taken work elsewhere. That was the story each time. A frontier town sheds souls. Nobody counts too closely. Except I was counting now. Half that list had vanished after speaking to Reverend Pike. At the bottom of the bundle was one older page, brittle and brown. The ink had bled, but I could still make out the heading. St. Mercy Bell House, 1849. Order of Atonement. Below it were instructions, written plain as a recipe. When the burden rises, hear it before sundown. keep water at the thresholds. Turn the hats. Bind the children's wrists in white. Speak no apology after dark. Send the name to the church before the third bell. And do not let the guilty die unconfessed, lest mercy come hungry into town. Mercy. That was the first time I understood what Dunmire had been doing all these years. Not customs. Rituals. Someone stepped outside the shed before I could read more. I drew my revolver and turned. It was Cal. He looked at the papers in my hand, and the color left his face. "My ma had one of those," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked ashamed of the answer. "Because when I was a boy, I asked what it meant, and she locked me in the root cellar until morning." He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "Sheriff, I need to say something." I knew then by the look on him that whatever came next would make the whole thing worse. "I took testimony," he said. "When?" "Yesterday, before Boone died." The air seemed to shrink around us. "Why?" He stared at the dirt floor. "Because I'm set to marry Annabelle in 2 months, and I thought..." He stopped. "I thought maybe a man ought to clean himself before that." "Clean what?" He swallowed hard. "When I was 15, I lied at a hearing in Tucson. Said I hadn't seen a man draw first. He got hanged for killing another fella in a card house. I knew he wasn't guilty of murder. I said nothing. Been carrying it since." He finally met my eyes. I told Pike. I came out feeling lighter. He gave one short, frightened laugh. Then last night the bell rang from my spurs. I took the papers from him before he could see my hands shake. "We're riding to St. Mercy." He said yes too quickly. That was Cal. Brave in the way the young are brave, with no respect for how much the dark can hold. We left within the hour. The road west out of Dunmire was not a proper road anymore. It was a memory of one. Wagon ruts choked with weeds, wheel-cut stone on the rise, a split-rail fence rotted to black teeth. By the second mile, the horses were sweating wrong, not from heat but nerves. By the third, Cal's mare refused the bit and had to be led. Then St. Mercy rose out of the dust. You've all seen it from far off and looked away. That cluster of dead buildings out in the basin. The old schoolhouse sunk sideways into the ground. 2 houses with no roofs. A livery half-eaten by sand. And at the center of it, the church. White once, maybe. Now the boards were gray and scabbed with age, and the steeple leaned just enough to make a man's eyes hurt. The bell tower still stood above it, open on all 4 sides, with the bell hanging there black and still as if time itself had forgotten to rust it. Our horses would not cross into town. We hitched them to a hitching rail half a block out and walked the rest. Nothing in St. Mercy looked truly abandoned. That is what frightened me. Dust lay on everything, but not evenly. Doorways had clean edges where hands had touched. The church steps were swept. The weeds in the graveyard had been cut back in a wide circle around the front path. "Someone comes here," Cal said. "Plenty of someones," I told him. The church doors were unlocked. Inside, it was cool enough to raise goose flesh. The pews stood in perfect rows, not warped, not broken. Each one polished by hands or sleeves or bodies passing them too often for a dead place. There were no candles on the altar, but wax had run there recently. White drippings hardened in branching lines like little rivers. The air smelled of old ash and iron. And under that, something sweet. Not flowers, Rot trying to behave itself. Cal moved down the aisle slowly, hat in both hands. Sheriff. I followed his gaze. Kneeling rails had been cut into the floor before the altar, not as one long piece, but as separate stations, 6 of them, each worn deep by years of pressure. In front of every rail sat a chipped saucer filled with well water gone green around the edges. On the altar itself was a wooden box with a slit cut in the top, a confession box. I lifted it. It was heavier than it ought to have been. Inside were folded slips of paper. Dozens. No names on the outside. Just sentences. I opened the first. I watched my sister starve and thanked God it was not me. The second. I told my boy his mother chose to leave. I buried her myself. The third. I wanted my husband dead long before the fever took him. I put them back at once. Cal said nothing. He had gone very pale. Then something struck overhead. Once, a metal blow so deep it shivered through the rafters and down into my knees. Cal dropped his hat. I looked up. The bell had not rung. I know that sounds mad, but I mean it plain. The sound came from above, but not from a swing. More like something heavy had moved against the bell from the inside. There came a second blow, then a drag. Slow, deliberate. Iron against iron. Cal whispered, "There's something up there." I drew my revolver. The ladder to the tower was behind the pulpit, half hidden by hanging cloth. We climbed it one rung at a time. The wood groaned under our weight. Halfway up, I smelled the sweetness again, stronger now, clotted with hot metal. At the top, the light changed. The tower chamber was narrow and open to the sky through slatted sides. Wind moved through it, but the air felt close and used. The bell hung above us on thick beams wrapped in old black cloth. Its bronze was not bronze anymore. It had gone dark as dried blood. Around the rim were scratches. Not weathering. Marks. Deep and parallel, like something with long iron fingers had been climbing it for years. Beneath the bell was a nest. There is no better word. Not of straw. Of church cloth, prayer books, cut lengths of rope, children's wrist ribbons, men's hat bands turned inside out, and bones so small and clean they could have belonged to birds if I had wanted to lie to myself. Cal made a sound behind his teeth. Then the bell spoke. Not with the ring, with his own voice. "Sheriff," it said from inside the metal above us. "Do you think the law hears everything?" Cal stumbled backwards so hard the tower shook. I fired twice into the bell. The reports nearly deafened us. Sparks jumped. The first bullet flattened and screamed away. The second vanished into the dark throat of the bell. For 1 second there was silence. Then every nail in the tower began to sing. High. Thin. 100 little iron throats all at once. The sound went through my skull like cold water. Something moved above the bell. Not down below us. Above it. Clinging upside down to the tower beams where shadow met light. I saw cloth first. Black strips hanging like burned vestments. Then a shape folded inward and lowered itself, slow as a man kneeling in prayer. It was too tall, even bent. Too narrow at the waist, too broad at the ribs. Iron ribs. I know what I saw. They shone through the hanging cloth, like curved bars in a lantern. The head came last, dipping beneath the beam. At first I thought it wore some kind of pale mask. Then it turned toward the light and I saw a bone. Not a man's skull. Something lamb-like and long-jawed, bleached white, and split too far down the mouth so the hinge opened nearly to the throat. Around the crown, crooked bits of black metal had been fused or tied or grown into it, a ring of bell clappers and rusted nails. Where its eyes should have been was darkness. Where its mouth opened was sound. Not a roar, not words. The strike of a church bell heard too close. Cal screamed. The sound barely reached me over the ringing in my head. I grabbed him and all but threw him down the ladder. I followed without shame, losing my footing and skinning both palms. We hit the sanctuary floor hard and ran for the doors as the entire tower boomed above us. Not from swinging metal, but from that thing shifting its weight. We made the street before either of us breathed again. At the edge of town, Cal bent double and vomited into the weeds. I looked back once. Something stood in the bell tower opening, still as a carved saint, watching us leave. That night, Reverend Pike came to my office on his own. No coat, no hat. Shirt half buttoned as if he had dressed in a hurry or not at all. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "You saw it," he said. I did not ask how he knew. I handed him the old pages from the clerk's chest and watched his eyes sink shut. "How long?" I asked. He sat without invitation and pressed both hands against his face. "Since before Dunmire had a name." "That ain't an answer." He lowered his hands. "Her name was Eliza Wren," he said. "She was the bellkeeper in St. Mercy. Midwife, herb woman, prayer reader. The old kind. Some called her a witch because men use that word whenever a woman knows the body better than the Bible." Outside, a porch board creaked. Somewhere down the street, someone set a bowl of water gently on wood. Pike went on. "In the drought year, children started dying. Cattle, too. Men were angry and thirsty and looking for a mouth to blame. Eliza told them the ground west of the church ought never be dug again. Said something old slept under the hill and the bell kept it still. They laughed at her. Then they found bones while digging a deeper well behind the church. Human bones with iron rings around them." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "They hanged Eliza from the bell rope before sunset. She did not beg. She told them if they wanted judgment so badly, they could have it every day forever. She said the bell would hear what God refused." I said, "And that thing in the tower?" Pike's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite fear anymore. More like surrender. "Maybe she called it. Maybe she only woke it. Maybe it was always there. Does it matter?" "Yes." "No," he said, "because what matters is what it wants now." He leaned forward. "It feeds on confessed guilt, on burdens given shape, on the moment a soul opens itself and asks to be seen. That is why the old order was made. Water at the thresholds. Hats turned. Silence after dark. Confession before sundown. The named sent to St. Mercy before the third bell." I felt sick all over again. "You've been feeding people to it." His eyes flared then, the first real heat I had seen in him. "I have been keeping it from coming into town hungry. By choosing who dies." "It chooses," he snapped. Then the anger fell out of him. "Not always the worst, not always the cruelest, just the marked." "How many?" He looked away. That was answer enough. I stood so fast my chair struck the wall. "You sanctimonious coward." Do you think I don't know what I am? He said, voice breaking. Do you think I have not heard every one of them? Men confessing beatings, women confessing hatred, boys confessing lies, girls confessing nothing worse than wishing themselves elsewhere. I hear them all. I write them down. I carry them out west because the last preacher tried to stop, and the thing came into Dunmire itself. It took 4 children in one night. We found one still kneeling. He shook his head. The town survives because it obeys habits it no longer understands. Then the habits end. Pike stood too. No, you will make it worse. From the cells behind me came the faintest little chime. Not from a prisoner, from the bars. Cal was in the doorway when I turned. He had been listening. There was blood running from his right ear. Cal, I said. He looked at me, but his eyes were not seeing the room. It's saying my name, he whispered. I crossed to him and took his shoulders. It can't have you if you don't go. That was when Pike said the one thing I will hear until my own grave opens. It already has him. He confessed. Cal started crying then, quietly, like a boy trying not to make his mother hear. That was the moment I decided to burn the church. Not tomorrow. Not with a committee. Not after a sermon. That night, we left after midnight with lamp oil, rifle cartridges, 2 coils of rope, and enough whiskey in Cal to keep his hands from shaking. Pike came too, because I put a gun on him and told him he would walk in front where I could see him. The town watched us go through cracks and shuttered windows. No one tried to stop us. That told me more than shouting would have. By the time we reached St. Mercy, clouds had covered the moon and the church stood black against black. The bell tower looked taller at night, as if the dark added wood to it. Inside, lantern light made the sanctuary sway. The saucers of water were fresh. There were people kneeling at the rails. 5 of them. Not strangers. Folks from Dunmire. Mrs. Bell from the store. Jasper Mays. Annabelle in her nightdress, white cloth tied at both wrists. 2 ranchers I knew by name. All kneeling with their heads bowed, as if they had walked there in sleep. Anna looked up when we entered. Her face was wet with tears and perfectly calm. Cal, she said, you were called. He made a sound I had never heard from a grown man. Pike went rigid beside me. I didn't send them, he whispered. No, he had not. The thing had rung for itself. Then the bell struck above us. Once. Dust sifted from the rafters. The kneeling townsfolk all spoke together without raising their voices. Let mercy take what is burdened. Pike dropped to his knees. I put the revolver to the back of his head. Get up. He did not move. The second strike came, and this time the church door slammed shut behind us, hard enough to crack one hinge. Cal spun and ran to them. They would not open. The third strike never sounded. Something descended through the tower opening instead. It came down the bell rope, hand over hand, if hands are what to call those jointed things at the ends of its arms. Black church cloth hung from it in strips, charred at the edges as though it had once burned and kept the memory. The lamb skull head tipped to one side. Iron clappers and rusted nails circled it like a mockery of a crown. The whole church began to chime. Not just the bell. Nails in the pews, buckles, hinges, my badge, Cal's spurs, the little metal clasp on Annabelle's collar. every piece of worked iron singing under one will. When it opened its mouth, the air bent with the sound. I could feel words inside it, but not in any language meant for living throats. Cal clapped both hands over his ears and dropped to one knee. The kneeling townsfolk smiled. That is the part I hate remembering most. Not terror, relief. As if the thing was a doctor come at last. Pike looked up at it with tears running into his beard. "Take mine," he said. "Leave the boy." The creature did not even turn toward him. Its dark attention settled on Cal. He had confessed. He had opened the door inside himself and named the wound. That was enough. I fired at it 3 times. The bullets struck cloth, bone, iron. One sparked. One vanished into the hanging blackness in its ribs. One tore away a strip of vestment and revealed beneath it, not flesh, but a cage of iron bound with something black and wet that moved like breath. The creature did not flinch. It only took 1 step closer. Pike rose suddenly and threw himself between it and Cal, arms spread like a man trying to stop a train with faith. "Mercy," he said. "Mercy." The thing rang. That is the only way I can say it. The sound hit Pike in the chest and lifted him off his feet. He struck the altar hard enough to break it. Blood came from his mouth in one fast sheet. He looked at me once, already dying, and managed to say, "Burn it." Then he stopped moving. I do not remember drawing the lamp oil from my satchel. I remember smashing it across the front pews. I remember Annabelle reaching for Cal and not seeming to know whether she meant to save him or offer him. I remember the smell of oil blooming through the sanctuary. And I remember taking the lantern, hearing Cal shout my name, and hurling the flame into the aisle. Fire ran like a living thing. Up the rails, across the confession box, over the old cloth, into the altar wood. The sanctuary lit all at once, bright enough to make the creature step back. For the first time, it moved like something surprised. The townsfolk began screaming then, as if waking in the center of a dream. Cal staggered toward me. I grabbed him by the coat and dragged him through the heat. The thing came down the aisle after us without haste, cloth burning from its sides in orange strips. Its mouth opened, and the whole tower thundered overhead. Burning boards rained down. At the doors, the iron latch would not lift. Cal seized the fallen crossbeam from the altar and drove it through the handles with both hands. The wood splintered. Light from outside cut a blade through the smoke. We burst out into the graveyard just as the bell tower gave way. The bell fell last. I saw it drop through flame, black and heavy and perfect, the rope still trailing from it like a hanging noose. It struck the church roof, and the whole front half of the building collapsed inward. The sound that followed was not metal. It was a cry so deep the ground answered. Then silence. No iron singing, no bell, no thing in the tower. Just fire climbing through the dead boards of St. Mercy and sparks lifting into the dark. Cal was on his knees in the dirt, coughing blood into both hands. Annabelle stumbled out after us and fell beside him. Her white wrist ribbons had burned away. Down the road, lanterns appeared. Dozens. The town had come at last. By morning, they had remembered exactly enough to kill me. Reverend Pike was dead in the church. Deputy Cal Reed was dead too. His lungs had gone before dawn from smoke and whatever that thing had put through him with its voice. He gripped my sleeve until the end and used his last clear breath to tell me not to ask forgiveness for any part of it. The church at St. Mercy was a black shell. The bell was gone. That is important. We found no bell in the ashes. No iron enough for one that size. Not even melted pieces. Just soot, nails, bone, and a hole beneath the altar that had not been there before, dropping down into dark earth lined with old stone. The townsfolk saw me standing there armed, Pike dead, Cal dead, church burned. The curse did the rest. By breakfast, some of them were already saying the fire started in my hands because I had quarreled with the preacher. By noon, others said I had dragged Cal out there drunk and shot him in the smoke. By evening, a few honest faces still looked uncertain, but not uncertain enough to fight the rest. And somewhere beneath all that forgetting, the older fear held them together. Because whether they knew the whole truth or not, they knew this much in their bones. Something had been fed at St. Mercy for a very long time, and if it had not died in the fire, it would need another offering. A blasphemer made nicely for that. So here I am, on a gallows built from fresh pine and iron nails, at sundown, with the whole town gathered as witness, and the bell ringing again in metal where no bell can be seen. Listen, there, in the hinges of the trap door, in the buttons of the men holding rifles, in the wedding brooch at Annabelle's throat. It did not die in the church. It moved into what heard it. That is the twist in all of this, the cruel little turn. I thought I was ending the ritual when I burned St. Mercy. I was only changing the church. It never needed the building. It only needed confession, judgment, and a crowd willing to call sacrifice righteousness. That is what St. Mercy always was. Not a place. A habit. And this hanging's the last part of it. You brought me up here as a murderer before sundown. You made me tell what I did. You stood beneath iron and waited for the bell. You have done exactly what the old order asked. When this rope tightens, the town will feel lighter for a day or two. The nightmares will thin. The children will sleep. The cattle will stop spooking at empty corners. Some of you will say the evil is past. Then in a week or a month, someone with a secret rot in them will hear a ringing from a spoon or a spur or the nails by the bed. And Dunmire will remember its little ebbets. The bowls of water, the turned hats, the white cloth, the silence after dark. You will not call it worship. That would be too honest. You will call it tradition. The deputy used to say a town is just what people agree to remember. He was wrong. A town is also what it agrees to forget. The sheriff behind me is asking if I have any last prayer. I do not. Prayer is what opened this door in the first place. But I have one last warning, and I want it carried farther than Dunmire. Farther than this scaffold. Farther than the basin and the Black Hill and the bones under St. Mercy. So hear me now. If this confession reaches you by some strange road, by static, by rumor, by dream, by voice, carried over distance it should not have crossed. If it reaches you through a broken signal of any kind at all, do not answer a church bell that rings where no church stands. Do not confess under a sound that comes from iron by itself. And if the people around you start calling sacrifice a kind of mercy, run before the third strike.